There's just over a week to go before Scotland heads to the polls and elects a new parliament. And this year, there's a brand new competitor on the cards, the ALBA Party, set up by former First Minister and previous head of the Scottish National Party, Salmond. But this is what his successor, Nicola Sturgeon, had to say about the new party.
I think there's been far less of a move from the SNP to Salmond's new party than he would probably have hoped for. I'm not sure that this new party helps the cause of independence. I don't include all of the people who are supporting it in what I'm about to say, but I'm not sure from the point of view of Salmond himself it is even intended to help the cause of independence. It's perhaps more about helping the cause of Salmond.
Well, Salmond is on the line now. Good morning and welcome. I suppose listening to that clip...
Thank you.
Listening to that clip from Nicola Sturgeon, your reaction might be, she would say that, wouldn't she?
No, I just think Nicola sounds a bit rattled, doesn't she not? I mean, the latest poll, of course, has ALBA gaining 8 seats from a standing start, which is quite exceptional. I mean, this is a new party which has just celebrated its 4th anniversary, Pat. That means we're 4 weeks old. So get to a position where the polls are predicting 8 seats in the Scottish Parliament is quite extraordinary. That would put us in a very powerful position. Not because we want to be in government, because we don't. What we want to do is inject some urgency into the cause and case for Scottish independence. And if we get 8 seats, even if we get a few seats, what we're going to do is lay a motion in the Scottish Parliament in 2 weeks' time, instructing the Scottish Government to initiate independence negotiations with Westminster.
Now, the electoral system that you have in Scotland is different to the one we enjoy here. Indeed, it's different to the one they have in Westminster because there are 2 components to it, that each person has 2 votes. Will you explain to our listeners how that works and what you want to use that system for in terms of voting for ALBA?
Well, let me do a dangerous thing, Pat. Let me quote a British Prime Minister in an Irish radio television show. When Lord Palmerston once described the Schleswig-Holstein question in European history as that only 3 people understood it. One was mad, one was dead, and half forgotten. The system that's used for the Scots Parliament, the list system, the D'Hondt system, is a bit like the Schleswig-Holstein question. Not very many people understand it, and those who do probably don't, or those who say they do. However, it is a better system than first past the post. It's a respectable proportional system. It's like the one used in Germany, and therefore it's a perfectly fair system, and everybody gets a chance to compete, and you put your name forward, and you take what the electorate judges. Mm.
Now, the system, I was trying to understand it last night in preparation for our conversation, and it turns out you can vote for your local representative, and that's fine, in every constituency, and that makes up a portion of the parliament. And then you vote for a party, and they get a proportion of the seats. But it seems if you do well in one, you do less well in the other, irrespective of how people actually voted. That's the bit I don't get.
Well, I don't think many people do get that bit, and that's perhaps but that is the reality of the system. I mean, for example, the last time round, the SNP got almost 1 million votes on that second section, the list section, the regional section, and elected for that 1 million votes only 4 MSPs. And our case in this election to these independent supporting voters is that if half of them, even half of them, or a quarter of them for that matter, switch to ALBA, then we'll elect a whole barrel load of MSPs, perhaps up to 30. And on the most recent poll, we'd elect 8. So the potential for electing more independent MSPs is there. The opportunity is there. And all we've got to do is get that case across. Incidentally, I find that if you make that case to an independent supporter, then they say they'll vote for ALBA. The only question for us over the next week is how many people can we contact to make that case and to say, don't waste your vote ALBA on the list, and get representation of people who want to regard independence not as a matter for the hereafter, but for the here and now.
So that business of the way it works, because you're not the SNP, and even if they poll very well, they don't get the benefit of that polling in the list system. But you don't expect to get too many seats directly elected in, if you like, the constituency, basis of the poll. But in the other, the list system, if you get a number of votes, you will get representation. So you're saying that you get more pro-independence people in Parliament if they kind of take votes from the SNP for the lists and let the SNP go about their business of getting individual members elected. Is that it in summary?
Well, Pat, for somebody that doesn't understand the system, you're doing very well. That's a very fair summary indeed. In fact, ALBA's not standing in the constituencies at all. And the reason for that is quite simple. We're telling people to vote SNP on the constituency list. We're asking people to vote for their SNP candidate in constituencies and then to transfer to ALBA in the regional vote, the second ballot. And that's the basis of our message and appeal. And of course, that is a very, very attractive message to SNP voters. It's perhaps not as attractive message to the SNP leader, Nicola Sturgeon, but SNP voters like that message when they understand it will result in more independents supporting MSPs in the Scots Parliament. And we call that the supermajority. I mean, we think with a reasonable switch of independence-minded people to the ALBA in this election, we could end up with perhaps 80, perhaps 90 MSPs supporting independence in a Scots Parliament of 129. And that will give us the sort of majority we need to face down Boris Johnson, to make sure we get an opportunity to vote Scotland to independence within the next couple of years or so, as opposed to waiting till sometime, according to the SNP, or even to 2026, which is the last estimate I saw from the Green Party, who say they support independence but don't seem to have a great deal of enthusiasm for it.
Now, it is a very close-run thing, people supporting independence or otherwise. There's a majority for not parting the ways with the rest of the United Kingdom of only about 2%, which flips when you say if it was guaranteed that Scotland could rejoin the EU, then it becomes 2% the other way. But it's still tight enough. And, you know, when you come to referendums or votes on independence, whatever it might be, we see what happened with Brexit, that because the threshold was 50-50, it led to a very narrow squeak in favour of Brexit and an awful lot of unhappy people. Surely you need to get a substantial popular majority for independence before it can be progressed.
Well, I mean, I would take my own experience as First Minister, Pat. When I launched the independence campaign for the referendum of 2014, that was in 2012, support for independence was below 30%. But I launched the campaign. And at the end of the campaign and the result, it was 45%. Indeed, at one point during the campaign, with about a week to go, you might remember, we got into the lead, according to the opinion polls. So you'll shift the dial on independence during the campaign. But unless you start that process, unless you start the independence referendum campaign or whatever electoral test is going to be accepted, then you're not going to finish it. You're not going to get the majority for independence that you're looking for until the people have the chance to hear the arguments, as they did in 2014. Interestingly enough, Pat, the dial on independence back then didn't actually shift until the high summer of 2014. That period just after the Commonwealth Games was in Glasgow. And what happened was there was a whole upsurge of grassroots, multifarious groups of people arguing for independence, doctors for independence, nurses for independence, teachers for independence, vegetarians for independence, many, many groups of people who arose from the grassroots arguing for independence. And independence stopped being the project of one political party, led by me, the SNP, and started to be seen as a mass movement of a whole variety of viewpoints saying, yeah, we're united on Scottish independence. And I think the lesson in that is quite clear. The lesson I took from it is if you want to build the sort of majority we need for independence, it mustn't be the project of a single political party. There'll have to be a variety of people arguing for it from perhaps slightly different points of view, because the population as a whole has different points of view. And if you want them to unite on independence, you've got to acknowledge these different points of view, not try to say, to funnel everyone into the same pigeonhole.
Now, your own leadership of ALBA, the new party, and we're familiar with the name because it's the word we use in Irish for Scotland. How is it as a brand? I mean, is it a word that Scottish people are familiar with?
Well, they're becoming familiar with it, Pat, and among its many other assets, I mean, now I've learned to pronounce it properly as ALBA, it was pointed out that my Scots pronunciation of ALBA didn't suit the Gaelic speakers of Scotland. So our Gaelic-speaking candidates have given me intense coaching over the last 4 weeks, and now I can say ALBA reasonably well. But it is the ancient name for Scotland, of course. Scotland was the Kingdom of ALBA for some 300 years. And therefore, what better name could you have for a political party which is expressing the urgency that Scotland should move forward to independence? It also is a helpful requirement or a helpful asset of going to the top of the ballot paper, or near the top. Mm-hmm. I think it's second in a ballot paper, which in that regional list system is extremely long. There's about 20 different parties competing in that regional list ballot paper. So being near the top, in my view, is something of an advantage. They get to your name before they get tired out.
Now, the question of your own political rehabilitation, we all know about your much publicised legal difficulties, for which you were completely vindicated, we know. So is this about the political rehabilitation of Alex Salmond more than anything else?
No, certainly not. I mean, there were actually 5 political parties, believe it or not, who all sensed the opportunity of standing on an independent supporting platform in the list. ALBA was one of these 5. The others were called the Independence for Scotland Party, the Scottish Independence Referendum Party. There was one called Scotia Futures, and then there was the Alliance for Action for Independence. And they were, all 5 approached me, actually. One, I think 2 or 3 asked me to be leader through the election. One of them was ALBA. I'm happy to say the other 4 have now supported ALBA. They've withdrawn their candidates and are now supporting ALBA. But so the opportunity of having a independence supporting a list party was there, before they asked me to lead it. Indeed, ALBA wasn't my conception. It wasn't my idea. It was that of the former World in Action journalist Laurie Flynn, who formed a party with a committee and invited me to lead it through the election, which I agreed to do. So no, it's not about me. It's about the sense of opportunity. And also the sense of frustration among many independence supporting Scots that not enough has been done to forward the case of independence, particularly against the background of Scotland being pulled out of the European Union against the will of the Scottish people. We want to re-establish a European connection, and particularly on trade and economics, as quickly as we possibly can. So many people in Scotland sense the urgency of presenting the independence case, and that's what ALBA stands for. We stand for getting on with independence. Let's get on with this job. Let's do it. Let's confront Westminster with a demand, or make them a demand they can't refuse. And incidentally, I mean, the state of Boris Johnson at the present moment, I mean, we present a demand in a couple of weeks' time, a puff of wind would blow that man over at the present moment. So I see the prospects of coming to terms with Westminster for an early test on Scottish independence is very high. But unless you start that process, you'll never finish it.
Do you have any sympathy for, I suppose, a former colleague in terms of the first ministerial job, Arlene Foster, currently in difficulties with her party and possibly getting the boot?
I do. I mean, I have to say, I don't know Arlene particularly well, Pat. Obviously, as you're well aware, I knew the Reverend Ian Paisley and Martin McGuinness extremely well. I think I can say probably pretty plainly now that I did my best to help them when I was First Minister, when the Stormont Assembly was in some difficulty back in 2007, and that I made it my business to help where I could, and both of them appreciated that, and I liked both of them enormously, and I thought they made brave steps and deserved to be supported. Which I was happy to do. So I have some natural sympathy for any First Minister who comes under criticism from their own party. But I have to say I don't know Arlene particularly well, and I mean I wish her well in general terms. But I never have had the same relationship with Arlene as I've had with Ian Paisley and with Martin McGuinness, who I thought towards the end of their careers did some remarkable things and should be remembered for that.
Alex Salmond, thank you very much for joining us, the leader of the ALBA Party in Scotland, as Scotland prepares to go to the polls fairly shortly.